Alright, welcome back. So here I'm transplanting some onions that have been in their starter trays so long they're starting to form bulbs. The reason these are so far along is not the result of neglect, but due to the fact that this has been the summer that refused to die. Following an exceptionally hot summer here in the Sacramento Valley, we had a fall heat wave that brought temperatures in the 90s and low hundreds well into last week, which was the second week in October. Since my fall garden consists largely of cool weather loving, frost tolerant crops, wherever possible, I had to delay the transplant of what I started under grow lights at the beginning of September. Unfortunately, some of my fall plants were becoming root bound in their starter pots and had to be planted out in spite of the extreme heat. So my fall garden became a long delayed and disjointed project, but it's finally complete. And for the first time in recent memory here, there are no 90s or hundreds in the forecast. This year I took a somewhat novel approach to my fall garden setup. So here's what I did. The first step in my bed prep this season was the removal of the top mulch layer. I wouldn't ordinarily bother with this, but I suspect many of my tomatoes became afflicted with some kind of disease toward the end of their lifespans, and I want to minimize the chances of it carrying over to the next tomato season. This mulch will either be discarded or buried at the bottom of some new beds I'm hoping I get to build this winter. With the beds mostly clear of mulch, I finally decided to address this gap here in my beds through which I lose quite a bit of soil during our rainy season. This was an easy enough fix thanks to the abundant supply of lumber scraps I have remaining from past projects. Something I noticed during my spring and summer garden season was the beds on which I left wood mulch did noticeably better than the beds I mulched with hay and other vegetable matter. As such, I want to go back to using wood mulch on most of my beds as an experiment to see if there's an overall positive effect on yields. Also, it will give me a way to recycle the wood shavings we use in our chicken pen. In order to utilize my abundant supply of spent chicken mulch, while minimizing the quantity of wood turned into the soil, which can lead to nitrogen sequestration, I hastily constructed these partitions using scraps on hand. I really didn't want to spend any additional money on these, and I certainly wasn't in the mood for a drawn-out project in the heat, so I half-assed it. These are pinned together with heavy-duty staples, and that's good enough for now. Yeah, at some point the staples will rust away and the partitions will collapse, but that's a problem for future me. Here are the partitions in place on my raised beds. I mostly had short lengths of cedar scrap on hand, so I had to get a little creative with size, configuration, and layout. I can't emphasize enough that I really didn't want to spend any additional money out of pocket on this project. My next step was to fill the partitions. First, I laid down a little general purpose organic fertilizer, followed by a blend of well-sifted soil and compost. I don't know if this setup will grow better veggies, but if nothing else, I'm really liking how this looks. Finally, I backfilled around the partitions with chicken mulch. This mulch has been sitting in barrels for about 6 months, so the chicken poop component should be fairly well composted by now. My hope is that as the mulch continues to decompose, rain, worms, and other organisms will work the usable nutrients into the soil, and the mulch layer will kind of double as a big bank of slow-release fertilizer. While I was busy setting up my gardens outside, my broccoli, kohlrabi, and Brussels sprout starts inside were becoming root-bound in their starter pots. I had to choose between the stress of them further languishing under grow lights or the stress of transplant into excessively hot conditions. So I rolled the dice and put them in the ground. Fingers crossed. All said and done, that's 13 broccoli plants and 11 kohlrabi with a few beets already in the middle there. I had to make something of a hard call on these two beds here. I had planted a second round of tomatoes here in July, and they were just starting to form fruits, though not that many. I had to decide if it was worth devoting fall garden space to plants that might give up a handful of ripe fruits before the frost. Additionally, like most of my tomatoes, they were showing some signs of disease. I ultimately decided to scrap them and make space for my onions. While I've yet to have much success growing onions over the winter, I decided to give a number of relatively fast-growing short-day varieties a try. These include scallions, also commonly called green onions or bunching onions, some shallots, crystal white wax, which look to be similar to cocktail onions, and Texas early grano, my only full-size onion variety. I had some extra space in my onion beds, so I direct sowed some additional onion seeds to supplement my starts. Next up, it was time to direct sow my greens in these two small beds here. The soil was, of course, bone dry and compacted, so I first had to saturate and churn up the soil a bit, or I might as well be trying to sow seeds on concrete. Now, I take a tremendously lazy approach to sowing small seeds like lettuce seeds. What I did was I first mixed together an assortment of leaf lettuce seeds, and then I just started randomly sprinkling them on the bed. As they grow, I'll thin by harvesting some as baby greens and then letting the rest grow to maturity. After the seeds are scattered, I just cover with a thin layer of light fluffy soil and water them in. I keep my wand on the mist setting to avoid dislodging the seeds. And finally, I temporarily cover the bed with a layer of cardboard to help keep the top layer of soil from drying out every few minutes. Conditions might have finally cooled recently, but sunny days in the 80s can still dry a bed out in no time. And on to carrots. This year, I'm growing my carrots primarily in the half wine barrel planters I have at the northern border of my garden, and I'll be co-planting them with a few radishes, as well as these Market Express turnips I've been meaning to try for a few years. Now, we don't eat a ton of radishes and turnips, but our chickens love the greens and roots alike, so what we don't eat will be turned into eggs and manure. Because radishes and turnips tend to grow taller and faster than carrots, I'm taking care to only sow them at the very southern edge of the planters, so they don't shade out the carrots. As with my greens, I'm more or less scattershot sowing these seeds. I'll thin them later if need be, though honestly I didn't thin my carrots last year and I was plenty happy with the results. Some were large for freezing, others stayed baby carrot size for snacking. As with my greens, I covered the seeds with a little bit of soil and misted them in, and these 30-gallon felt grow bags here made the perfect temporary covers for the half-barrel planters. Lastly, I needed to do something with the bed space nearest the southern edge of my property. These don't really get enough sunlight through the winter to grow anything we want to eat in a reasonable amount of time. Plants will grow, they just grow very slowly. Stuff like broccoli, beets, Brussels sprouts, etc. might not yield anything worth harvesting before I need the space for my summer garden. So I'm just going to cover crop them with a blend of various greens, radishes, clover, dill, and rapini, which we don't like but our chickens love. Some of the stuff we might harvest and eat, some will supplement our chickens' diet over the winter, and the rest will be terminated sometime in February to give it time to decompose and rebuild the soil prior to the next spring and summer garden. And with that, my fall and winter garden is 100% planted. And I think I'll wrap up this video of a quick tour of where everything is and show how everything's going so far. One of the last vestiges of my summer garden are these here Tidy Treats tomatoes. They're still giving us, good handfuls of these really delicious, tiny little red tomatoes here for salads, etc. as we move through October. They're a dwarf plant. They have a really small footprint, as you can see. Again, the fruits are just absolutely delicious, very sweet. Skin's maybe a little thick, but not so bad to be a deal breaker. The one thing that I'm concerned about is these are clearly being afflicted by something. You'll notice a lot of dead foliage on these. I'm hoping that whatever this is not something that's going to carry over into the next tomato season. Certain things, like I suspect it might either be early blight or possibly bacterial spot, and that has me nervous because those can linger a while. So fingers crossed there. On the patio, I still have this habanero here that's still producing peppers. This has been a great plant, so I am actually going to try, before we hit frost here, to prune this back and overwinter it, so I don't have to start from scratch on all my hot peppers. I also have a couple of containers of carrots here that you saw me planting just a few minutes ago. I'm hoping that by keeping all of my carrots a little further north so they get more sun will mean that I can harvest these earlier and not have to wait till March. Also, again, those are Tidy Treats tomatoes after being harvested, and a lone cayenne pepper here that's still producing for me. And these three beds here, each one is about 3.5 by 3.5 feet, are chock full of potatoes that I planted around the 1st of September, mostly Yukon Golds, a few red potatoes, and I think a random russet in there. And these are very crowded. There's like 9 pounds of seed potatoes that I packed into these three beds. The goal is to get as many small boiler potatoes out of these as I can before the frost, knowing they're not really going to have time to grow large potatoes no matter what I do, again, before they're usually killed by frost at the end of November. Also, I want to apologize real quick for the cluttered, disheveled nature of my garden and yard. I've been balancing a lot of things, and that coupled with the heat, I haven't been motivated to get out and really organize and declutter. Doing home improvement projects inside plus a full-time job, it's been a bit rough. These are back to those beds of greens that I planted earlier in the video. This one was lettuce. The other one is going to be full of spinach, hopefully. Hopefully it doesn't bolt this year like it did last year. I should avoid that because I'm planting them a little later. These two beds in the corner, I'm going to let them be for now. I think that's where I'm going to put a second crop of potatoes. The idea to start those right around November 1st. If I do that, the plants are still small through the worst of our frost season, and when plants are small, they're way easier to cover. These two beds here, I think, are going to get left alone. They don't get a ton of light. They get enough to grow some stuff. In the bed there at the back near the fence, that really doesn't get enough, so that's just going to get churned in and cover cropped. Also, if all goes well, this whole section of the garden here is going to be reworked, so I don't really want to plant anything in these beds, only to have to tear it up to do a rebuild. This bed here is one of the mostly cover crop beds, except for this close edge right here. I have some overflow beet starts and turnips. The edges do get enough light to grow some stuff in a reasonable amount of time. The rest of the bed does not, so it got my cover crop mix. Here's my lone surviving bush delicata squash plant that looks like it's going to give me all of one smallish squash. This was a second round, planted out, I believe, in August. I'm starting to think that maybe it's not worth the effort of planting a second round of squash. The growing season is long enough, but ultimately I always end up having to plant them out at one of the hottest times of year. And the heat stress just really negatively affects the plants, and you get low yields like this. Here is my bed of mostly broccoli and kohlrabi. We also have some beets in those smaller square partitions in the center. This shows how much these have really grown, in the 2 or 3 weeks since I had to plant them out. Something I'm concerned about here, I'm going to zoom in a minute on one of these kohlrabi plants. Only a few of my kohlrabi are forming those round bulbous stalks that they're supposed to. I don't know if the others are going to catch up with them, or if it's an effect of heat stress that they're just going to be, straight and leggy. Time will tell. I'm also wondering, I don't know, maybe they don't have to bulb to be worth eating. We'll see. This bed here, I have a total of 4 Brussels sprouts plants, and in the middle I've direct sowed some extra beets and turnips. Again, the chickens absolutely love giant turnip roots, so more power to them. I only like turnips and beef stew, but it's still good to have around. Another 2 half barrels of carrot seeds, really hoping for an earlier harvest than most years on those. This bed here, I've got 2 overflow broccoli plants. The rest are Brussels sprouts. You can see that the cabbage white butterfly caterpillars have been chewing things a bit, but I've treated with BT spray, and that seemed to have cut down on that quite a bit. Onto my onions here. Again, I've never had much luck growing onions, but I'm hoping that this year I planted out enough that, I'll get something. I have confidence at least for the scallions. It seems like those are pretty easy to grow, and it looks like some of my direct sowed stuff is just starting to come up. Another cover cropped bed here, calling these the chicken gardens, everything that you see covered in straw. And these beds here still have a couple of remaining butterbush, which are bush variety butternut squash. Each one has a small squash. It's not really in the way, so I let them go just to produce what they're going to. This one, it started to form between a gap in two beds, so it got a little compacted. But it looks like it's gonna, ripen up and cure, and probably be ready right around Thanksgiving. All right, and that's about all I've got for today. It feels good to have my fall garden more or less in place. What I do like about a fall garden is it's mostly set it and forget it. There's not a ton of ongoing maintenance that I have to do. It's just kind of going to start growing, hopefully, and producing veggies slowly, gradually throughout the winter. One downside about this slow season is it gets a little harder to come up with video ideas throughout the late fall and winter. So I'm definitely open to any ideas or suggestions, something that you would like to see a very amateur small garden YouTube channel take on, any experiments that I can do, assuming I can afford them. Any investigations or product reviews that anybody wants to see, drop them in the comments. I'll consider it. Like I said, making no money on this channel, of course, so cost is a consideration, but other than that, open to ideas. Really hoping that we are finally done with all truly hot weather. Wouldn't be surprised after this summer if we still had an odd 90-degree day or so in the rest of October and maybe even into November. Hopefully we get rewarded with a frost-free winter that still provides sufficient non-destructive rain to replenish everything. Not holding my breath on that. Things seldom work out that way. But anyway, until next time, let's hope it all doesn't die.